Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Quorum Podcast. This is where academic medicine meets remote, austere, and resource-limited areas. Welcome back to the program. This is Aebhric O'Kelly. This week, we are with Dr. David Newman, who is an MD, PhD, specializing in aerospace medicine and a bit of military medicine. He's written many papers and textbooks. And David, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Aebhric. Very nice to be here and talking with you again.
So tell us a bit about yourself and what's keeping you busy.
Well, how much time have you got? I could speak for weeks on this. Well, as you said, I'm a doctor. That's my original training. And then I went into the Royal Australian Air Force, which was something I was always keen to do, and spent 13 years in our Air Force as a military flight surgeon, working with the pilots in various platforms, mainly on the tactical fighter side, so our F-18 force and the lead-in fighter training force, which was where I got my interest in research that ultimately got to my PhD, which I did towards the end of my time in the Air Force, looking at effects of G-force on pilots. And then, so after 13 years in the Air Force, I left, and that's 24, almost 25 years ago. I left the Air Force, but I had a fantastic time. I'd do it again in a heartbeat. Since I left the Air Force, I sort of have had a dual career in parallel as an international consultant in aviation medicine and an academic career as a professor of aerospace medicine at a number of universities where I do teaching and research. I'm also the editor-in-chief of the International Journal of Aviation Medicine, Aerospace Medicine and Human Performance, which is keeping me preoccupied these days. But I also get involved in a range of other things. Depends who asks me to do things, but it can range from aircraft accident investigation work, I've done quite a bit of that, to pretty much anything that relates to the application of medical science in the aviation environment.
So you're a pilot as well?
Yes, I'm a civilian pilot with all the qualifications that go with that, and that gave me a unique opportunity while I was in the Air Force as a qualified civilian pilot to get the chance to fly some of the aircraft in our Air Force, more or less in an unofficial capacity, if you like. I'm not a military pilot, but I was taught by the guys how to fly F-18s and things like that, which is just fantastic fun, I have to say. They're great airplanes to fly if you ever get the chance.
So would you say that's your peak flying experience, is the F-18s, or is there other ones that are more fun and adrenaline-filled?
Well, that's a very good question. So I've had the good fortune to fly 4 different types of fast jet, and I guess the 2 top ones would be the F-18 and the Harrier, the jump jet, only because that's such a unique platform. Well, it's quite rare to have been able to fly one of those while I was on exchange in the UK with the Royal Air Force. But yeah, the F-18 it's a beautiful looking aeroplane. It's got tons of power. It's highly maneuverable. That's pretty much the peak of my flying, I would think. If I was to pick one aeroplane that I would fly again, knowing I can never fly any other aircraft after that, it would be that one. I think it's such a fantastic aeroplane. And I had a lot of fun in it, so that's good.
So given the chance of the new F-35s, you wouldn't take that up?
Well, I didn't say that. Yeah, I'd have a go at that. It's a different type of aeroplane, though. But yeah, look, I'd have a go at it. Yeah, why not? But that's not likely to happen, so I'll have to look back on what I have done. And the F-18 is, I'm looking at pictures of them on my wall at the moment, the ones I've flown in. So, still got a soft spot for that aeroplane.
The Harrier must have been incredible to have a takeoff and landing of a meter needed, right? So a complete vertical takeoff and landing. How was that for you?
In the Harrier, yeah, it was amazing. It was amazing. Now, I'd gone to England after 3 years of flying with the tactical fighter people in our Air Force, so I was familiar with the fast jet environment. And when I got the chance to fly the Harrier, obviously I took it. with an instructor. And the one thing I remember, I mean, once you get it in the air and it's flying, it's like most other fast jets. The two things though, we did a short takeoff rather than a vertical takeoff, and that was very different because it's a very short takeoff run. But instead of the nose wheel coming off first and then you sort of climb into the sky, using the nozzles on the Harrier meant that the aircraft didn't change its attitude at all. It just blasted off the ground at the right moment, right? That's not normal for a fast jet. But then coming back into the hover for landing was just it was great fun, but it felt weird because normally in a fast jet you're going fast, and here we are hovering, 150 feet off the ground or whatever it was, with full power to keep this thing from falling out of the sky, just sitting there. And it's quite unusual experience to do that. But then, just gently reducing the power and descending to then touch down on the ground, it's quite remarkable. But the transition from going full speed to into the hover, which we did, you can do this maneuver where you basically extreme braking in the air using the nozzles to come to a complete stop and then transition to a hover. That's quite brutal. But yeah, remarkable aeroplane, but not many of them around anymore.
Why do you think that is? Don't you think that capability would be profoundly beneficial, especially for close air support? Why do you think it went the way of the dodo?
Well, I don't know. It was an older airframe, of course, and it was not supersonic. So the lack of supersonic speed was a bit of a restriction. It also had only one engine, so if you lost that engine, that was the end of the aeroplane. And one of the variants of the F-35 is a vertical takeoff and landing option. So that capability exists, just now in a supersonic F-35 airframe. Again, only with one engine though. So I think, I think technology just moved on. The reason why we have these jets has evolved a little bit. The F-35 now just basically takes a whole, bag of weapons airborne to deploy them with much more sophisticated targeting systems and search and track systems than the Harrier and jets like that ever had. So I think the whole thing has just evolved and gone in a different direction, I guess. Yeah. I would have liked to have seen a 2-engine Harrier. Maybe that's not going to happen, obviously, but yeah. There are other experts greater than me, Aebhric, that could probably answer why that happened, but the whole dynamics have changed, I guess.
You and I also had a chat about how amazing this timeline is to have human pilots, that from 1903 and we're extrapolating like how many more decades are there going to be of human pilots before everything turns completely into AI. What are your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I mean, I've been asked this question a lot, and the way I explain it to people is that in some time from now, people will look back at the course of human history and think, for a period of time, say 100, 150 years, people used to strap themselves into these aeroplanes and fly around in a high risk situation with extreme G-force and high speed, high altitude capability, all of that to do government policy, shall we say. And then no one did it before then, and then no one did it after that period of time. And I think it's inevitable, really, with the way technology is moving, that the need to have a human inside a fast jet in combat situations is going to be a piece of history. I think people won't do it again because you can now. You can take a lot of the physiological and medical issues away from fast jet operations if the pilot isn't sitting in it. If the pilot's sitting somewhere remote, flying it as a drone, or standing off the battlefield somewhere, just controlling drones from an aeroplane and sending them in to do what they have to do. You're not risking people directly then, and I think that's where it's going to go. I think the current 5th generation fighters might be the last human occupied fighters when they finally go out of service in 20, 30 years time.
So do you think in the year 2100 there's going to be some old guys flying an ancient F-35, the only one that's still flying after all those years, and they need special license to do so.
I could see that because it's a bit like now where we have people flying F-35s in the Air Force, and people flying P-51s and Spitfires from World War II and keeping them flying for historical reasons. So yeah, I could see in 2100, the local flying club trying to keep a F-35 airworthy to display it at air shows for nostalgic reasons. Who knows? Who knows? I don't think the F-35's got quite the cachet of the Spitfire as an aeroplane. But I won't be here in 2100. I'll never know.
Well, the B-52 is what, 80 years old, and I'm sure it's still going to be flying in 2100.
Yeah, well, after that, we'll definitely have that'll get to the 100-year mark for sure. I would say because as you say, they're still flying them and they keep extending their life. And I think you'll see aeroplanes like that go to 100 plus years of active flying operations. Which is amazing to think of, and that number of years spent flying. But it'll happen.
So, David, last week you and I met in Taiwan at the Taipei International Military Medicine Forum, and you presented on aerospace. Tell us about your presentation and tell us about your experience in Taiwan.
Yeah, well, it was a great meeting actually, wasn't it? 3 days of quite packed presentations on a variety of topics. Um, it's my third time to Taiwan, but the first time to that actual conference. Um, and I spoke about some of the physiological and medical challenges faced by fast jet pilots, pretty much as an overview for a largely Army audience who don't often think about or need to think about what happens to pilots of fast jet aircraft. So I talked about the effects of high G-force, which is a particular interest of mine, and I also concentrated on some of the health effects of G, such as in the adverse sense, G-induced neck injuries, and then I talked about what happens if everything goes wrong and the pilot has to leave the aeroplane, and so the ejection seat and how that works and what that does was the way I rounded off my presentation. So it was an overview of what it's like to be in a fast jet, as much as you can in a 30-minute presentation.
And as Army medics, we don't really think about the physiology. So if we're asked to go to a down pilot and say the PJs are busy or whatnot, and as an Army medic, we're supposed to assess, and it never really dawned on me of the physiology of and the possible damage that these pilots would have as they eject.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess that's one of the things, that's why I chose that little bit to add to my presentation, because you could come across in a combat zone a pilot stuck in a parachute harness up a tree who may appear completely uninjured, but may have a vertebral fracture as a result of the ejection. Because there's a roughly 20% chance for a given pilot that if they eject, they could have a vertebral body fracture. And in my experience of having rescued a couple of people who have ejected, one of the guys, when I assessed him, there was nothing to find, and he said, "There's nothing wrong with me, doc." But when we got him back to the medical centre and X-rayed him, he had a vertebral fracture, which only became painful when I told him he had one. Once the adrenaline of the whole experience wore off. So yeah, it is something to think about. These are sort of hidden injuries. They heal very well, but you need to know that they're there. You don't want to put a guy back in the aeroplane with a vertebral fracture in place. Once it's fully healed, no problem, they can go back flying. It's interesting, what we've learned is that if you have a vertebral fracture from ejection and it's fully healed, if you go back flying and have to eject a second time, if you get another vertebral fracture the second time, it will be a different vertebral body that fractures. It's never the same one again, because that now, in the healing process, becomes so much stronger than it ever was. So, there's not been a single case of one vertebral body fracturing on two separate ejection occasions. It's always a different one, which is interesting.
So as a pilot training option, perhaps you as a doc can go in and do fractures on their vertebrae before and then let it heal, so that way they'll never get a vertebral fracture.
Well, that's right. That's right. That is difficult to get through an ethics committee if you want to do that sort of thing. But technically, that would work. It's not really how we practice, though, is it? So it's a bit difficult. Yeah.
So you designed a postgraduate course in aerospace medicine for King's College London. Is this something you talk about during that program as well?
No, because that tends to have actually, no, we do. Now that I mention it, we cover ejection because it's designed for both civil and military doctors. So we cover the whole thing. I do talk about ejection seats and ejection seat injuries in more detail on the accident investigation course that I developed for King's, which is for doctors and health professionals who want to know about the medical aspects of an aircraft accident investigation. So yeah, we cover all of those things on that because there's a huge range of things that can go wrong when you eject from a medical perspective. So we cover all of those on that course, as well as everything else that's related to the process of an aircraft accident investigation with a medical focus, if I can put it that way.
So tell us a bit more about this course that you run for King's College London.
Well, it's a 5-day in attendance program. We have online courses as well, but the accident investigation one works better if you're all in a group. Runs March every year, so the next one's March 2025. It's in London, next to the Shard, the huge glass building there. And I teach that, and we basically run through the process of doing an accident investigation, but we also use lots of case studies looking at accidents and what happened and all that sort of stuff, so that the principles of accident investigation are covered, but the emphasis is not so much on becoming an accident investigator, because that's a separate course. This is for doctors that may get involved in an accident investigation as a medical expert. And also for anyone with a health background who's got an interest in this. It's interesting, in that 5 days, we pretty much cover all areas of aviation medicine because all of that is important in an accident investigation. And on the last day, we have a tabletop exercise where we split the course into 2 groups and they look at an accident, and I drip feed them information. They have to ask for it, right? But if they've paid attention during the course, they know what to ask for when it's needed. And then we get to the point where they reckon they've solved the case and they know exactly how the accident evolved and what went wrong and what the causal and contributory factors were. And it's interesting that in some cases, both groups come up with a different yet entirely plausible explanation for the same accident. And then I tell them what really happened. So it's a good way to reinforce the whole process. It's a lot of fun.
And is that part of your aerospace medicine module, or is that a different module? You have 2 different modules of King's College.
Yeah, so there's several courses we run there. All right, so there's the aircraft accident investigation course, 5 days I just spoke of. There's an online introduction to aerospace medicine course, which basically is a self-taught thing. You log in and there's a whole bunch of lectures I've recorded, and you go through the whole topic like that in your own time over a period of a couple of months. But there's also a basic course in aerospace medicine and an advanced course, and those 2 courses are in person as well, and they're designed for people who want to become medical examiners and do medicals on pilots as part of the regulatory requirements to be a pilot. They have to have a medical, and doctors have to be trained specifically to do that. They're all the short courses, if you like, but King's runs a diploma/master's program, which is 6 months for the diploma, 12 months for the master's, and that's in attendance. It's 6 months full time if you're doing the diploma. Most of the students tend to be military, so paid for by their governments, but there are civilian doctors or physiologists sometimes that do that course, particularly from a master's perspective, which is effectively the diploma with a research project on the end of it. So yeah, that's what's done at King's. So it's quite a busy little unit with only a small number of staff.
So if any of the listeners are interested in aerospace medicine, they can start with the intro to aerospace medicine, which is just the online part.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And quite a few people start with that and then think, yes, I really like this sort of topic. I now know a bit more about it and go on and do some of the other courses and become an accident investigator or medical examiner to do pilot medicals. So yeah, that was the point of that course, was to get people a basic level of knowledge about what the field is, to sort of prime them for more training when they were ready.
Last week in Taiwan, I asked you what academic program you would like to design. If you get a clean slate and full support, you could design anything you want. Have you given that more thought?
I have. I still don't have a really good answer for you, though. I mean, a diploma in aviation medicine is sort of the gold standard, if you like, for aviation medicine around the world. Not many places offer it. I mean, America has a different system entirely. The Commonwealth system, the England, Canada, the Australia, that sort of thing. We see the diploma that out of the UK as the gold standard. Otago University runs a diploma master's program as well, but they're really only two institutions worldwide that do it. I have designed a diploma course that would have been something, if I wanted to do the perfect course in aviation medicine, what would I have done? And that's what I developed. I wrote this whole thing out. Thought, man, that would be really, really good. I mean, you can go crazy with this, but I'm still thinking about it.
I'll come back to you on that one after you've given it some thought.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, why not?
So you received your PhD from Newcastle, University of Newcastle. Tell us, what was your thesis, or how was that process for you?
Yeah, it was really good, actually, because I did that while being a full-time military officer. So I did it in my spare time, so to speak, and that's not easy. But to anyone contemplating a PhD, that my basic piece of advice to them is always pick something that you are interested in, because if you're not interested in the topic, you won't finish it, right? So I was interested, because of the amount of flying I was doing. I was interested in the fact that the more G I experienced, the easier it was to tolerate it. And in talking to some of the pilots, they also had experienced the same thing, but there was no scientific evidence to support this phenomenon of adaptation to G. So I did a whole bunch of experiments comparing pilots with non-pilots, giving them a G challenge, and looking at how their blood pressure and heart rate would change with the G. And there's a standard human response to this, where if you suddenly get exposed to a little bit of G, your blood pressure drops, and then your innate reflexes kick in and drive blood pressure back to where it should be. And that takes about 10 seconds or so to make that correction. And this is designed to stop you fainting when you stand up suddenly, or get out of bed in the morning, sort of thing, change posture very quickly. But it's the same reflex that tries to keep you conscious under G. So the non-pilots would all demonstrate the standard human response. But the pilots who'd been flying to high G almost right up to the point where I tested them, they wouldn't have that blood pressure drop. They would just stay where they were, which was dramatically opposite. And that's because they're used to going to 7.5 G, and I'm giving them 1 G. So their cardiovascular system just looked at that and just laughed at it, right? And so that was amazing. So there's a clear difference between pilots and non-pilots in their cardiovascular reflex, which just becomes much more effective and reacts quicker if you exercise it more under high G. And then as a follow-up experiment, I tested the same pilots on 2 separate occasions. Once before they went on their annual holidays, and then once when they came back, right, to see how that would work time-wise. And the difference between when they were actively flying and when they were not actively flying was pretty apparent, right? They were, after a period of non-flying, they were more like a standard human, right, with the same response. But once they were back flying again, they would adapt. So I was able to show that there was definitely a training effect happening in that group of pilots. So I published all of that in the journal, and so now we have a scientific basis for cardiovascular adaptation to high G due to frequent repetitive occupational exposure.
That's fascinating. They lost their resilience after going on holiday. So how often do you have to see high Gs to have a continual cardiovascular improvement?
Yeah, that's the obvious follow-on question. So someone else is going to have to do that for their PhD. We don't know is the answer, but what we do know is that if you are perfectly G adapted, if you take 5 weeks away from flying, you lose almost all of it. You go back to normal. So it seems to decay very quickly. Exactly how much and when, and if it's a linear thing or it's fine and then just drops off dramatically, we don't know yet. But we also know, just anecdotally from pilots, is that you can get it back within a few weeks. So it's a few weeks to build it up and a few weeks to lose it, but that's about as specific as we have at the moment. Yeah.
I've got a very odd question. So I'm thinking, like dive chambers, we're now using them for stroke and burns. Is there hypertension application for putting someone into you talked about having a spinner, the high G spinner. Um, would that do something for somebody's cardiovascular system has pathology? But then now you said it only lasts 5 weeks, but um, am I a bit touched to think of it the other way? So if you have somebody who has a cardiovascular hypertension, if you put them into a high G spinner for the next 5 weeks, would they have normal blood pressure?
Well, that is a fascinating question. The only way to find out would be to do it as an experiment. I think there's a lot of factors that could cloud the ability to assess the outcome of that, though. And really, you'd have to keep people in there all the time, otherwise they'd lose it.
Yeah.
And I don't think people want to be in a centrifuge every day.
No, we can't really send them to Jupiter for the rest of their life, can they? So they have higher gravity.
That's right. You can't do that. Yeah, and then once they're there, they're not going to tell you whether it worked or
not. Fair enough. That's fascinating, and you found a topic that needed some answers.
Yeah. And it was based on personal experience and anecdotal discussions with the pilots, and of course we know that happens to astronauts in reverse, right? So when you go into space, there's no gravity, so there's nothing for that reflex in your body to deal with. So it basically turns itself off. It's not needed in space. But once you come back to Earth, you do need it, and then you've got to rebuild your adaptation back to a 1G thing. So while I had this anecdotal experience and information from the pilots, I also knew what happened in space. So I figured, well, if you lose it in space, if you're going to higher levels of G in a fighter airplane, it must upregulate itself and get better. The opposite of spaceflight. And as it turns out, that seems to be what happens.
Yet it takes more than 5 weeks for someone who spent time in space to get their cardiovascular system back to normal.
Yeah, well, it's a very unusual thing to go into space for 10 or 14 days, or in some cases even longer, months if not years. And so, trying to return the body to its, let's call it its natural 1G earthbound state takes time. And there is an individual variation as well. Some people deal with this much better than others. But you don't know that until you've been put in that situation to find out whether you're a fast responder or a slow responder. So, the two environments, high G and space, are not directly opposite, right? There's a lot of nuances in between. And of course, the fighter pilots are only getting occasional G exposure. They're not flying non-stop every day. Whereas if you're in space, you have 24 hours of exposure to 0G every single day for as long as you're up there.
That's the difference.
Which is far more dramatic, prolonged training effect, if you like. Yeah.
I'm also thinking of the similarities between the pressures of diving and than your high G maneuvers. So in your high G maneuvers, your body's only feeling pressure on one side. Their bum, right? Their back, their bum is this huge machine is pushing against them. Where whilst you're diving, you're having that pressure on the entire surface of your body. So you can't. The research you did there doesn't really work for diving, does it?
No, no, that's a totally different thing
Yeah.
as well. I mean, the atmospheric pressure increases every 10 meters you go down, doesn't
Yeah.
it? So that's a dramatic difference, and it's a pressure as opposed to a force. So
That's a good point.
you know,
Yeah.
we could get tied up in knots here, but yes,
Yeah.
it's not the same environment. No.
So you just stepped into editor-chief of the Aerospace Medicine and Human Performance Journal. So tell us about that experience and how did you get the job and have you been part of the journal for a while?
Yeah, it's published by the Aerospace Medical Association, which is based in the US, and it's sort of the peak international body for aerospace medicine worldwide. And I've been a member and a fellow of that for a very long time. And so, probably about 20 plus years ago, I joined the editorial board, and I've been a reviewer for that journal for a long time, as well as a few others. So, when the previous editor in chief announced he was retiring, I sort of put my hand up and said, "Well, you know, I'll be happy to give that a go." And they were very happy to have me take over. Um, and yeah, I'm almost at the end of my first year of doing that. It was quite a quick learning curve, but one of the advantages, I get to see the leading edge research being done before anyone else does. So that's kind of cool. I get to read about it, and then some month later it'll appear in the journal, and everyone else gets to see it. But I've already seen it by then, so that's kind of neat. Yeah, it's interesting. You have to work with the authors a bit to get and the reviewers to sort of get the manuscript ready to be accepted, if it is accepted. I mean, we have about a 40% rejection rate.
Wow.
Stuff that just isn't quite where it should be in terms of standard. And I'm focusing on small improvements because the previous editor-in-chief and editors before him all did a very good job in keeping the standard high. We all make our little individual changes, but there are a few areas I'm focusing on to improve the standard of publication. But what I'm having to wrestle with that previous editors-in-chief haven't is the increasing use of AI in academic activities. So I have seen a few articles submitted that are being clearly written badly by AI, and there's no way we can accept those for publication. So it's obviously a big academic area of interest at the moment. The integrity of scientific research with the increasing use of AI and large language models. So we're doing a lot of work around how to, we introduced a policy on how people can use it. It's quite restrictive because we need people to have their own creative academic research ideas, not just have a large language model generate one. We need people to have the ideas. So that's an ongoing issue. It's challenging. But yeah, I'm enjoying it. It's a considerable honour towards the end of my career to end up as the editor-in-chief of the journal in which I published virtually all my research over, what would it be, 30 years now that I've been publishing in that journal. So yeah, it's quite a nice thing to be the editor-in-chief now.
Plus, you get to see the other side of it. You've been working for an editor-in-chief for 2 decades, and now you get to be on the other side of the table and maybe fix some of the things that you saw as a problem as an editor, a normal editor or a reviewer.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. So yeah, it's an interesting area to work in. That's for sure.
The AI is a problem as well so I'm doing AI detection for any of these essays that I grade for the Masters of Austere Critical Care that I'm part of, and I know people are using it. I use it, but I fact check everything and I rewrite everything. So I could put into the AI, please write a paper on this interesting medicine, and they'll cite stuff, and then you search the site the journal article that they're citing, it doesn't exist. They completely fabricate tons of stuff, and we're now putting all of our submissions through AI detectors, but then we're using AI to detect AI writing. We're still trying to figure that one out.
Exactly. And the issue you just touched upon with the fake generation of references is a very hot topic in academic publishing right now. Yeah. But at least we're all aware of that option now. So, the thing is, these tools will get better and better and better and harder to detect. So, yeah, there's one thing that keeps me awake at night in my editor-in-chief role. It's that somehow something will get through and get published that's nonsense. That would not be a good thing.
Yeah.
So we're doing our best to avoid that.
Yeah. So looking through your LinkedIn page, I came across Crazy Socks for Docs nonprofit, and I just had to bring that up as one of my last points. To tell us about why Crazy Socks for Docs. What's the background of that, and what is your nonprofit doing?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and I'm very happy to be associated with Crazy Socks for Docs. It was started by a good friend of mine, cardiologist, Jeffrey Toogood is his name, who had some mental health issues, significant ones, some years ago. And long story cut short, he's the founder of Crazy Socks for Docs. But the way that Crazy Socks for Docs thing came about was that he was putting on different socks every day without sort of realizing it. And people were noticing it and thinking, he's not quite right. And no one sort of helped him or asked him if there was something going on, right? And there's a lot of behind the scenes stuff that was going on that didn't help him at all. And so after Jeff got through his very difficult period, he decided that he would make this into a movement and to support mental health in health professionals, to get rid of the stigma, to raise awareness, and to help his fellow healthcare professionals dealing with mental health issues. So that's how the charity came about, and he asked me to get involved, and as a sort of a director of the charity, I was more than happy to offer my time for that. So there's an annual Crazy Socks for Docs Day, first Friday of every June, and we encourage everyone to deliberately wear Crazy Socks for Docs and post it to the socials. And now we run a big social media campaign, and we raise money to support activities promoting better mental health in healthcare professionals. And this phenomenon has now gone global. Around the world, every Crazy Socks for Docs Day, it dominates social media.
Nice.
I guess unless Beyonce brings out another single at the same time. But yeah, it's become a huge, huge thing. And Jeff's done an amazing amount of work to help his colleagues, despite what happened to him. So I'm more than happy to help him out with that.
Mental health is neglected overall, but let alone neglected for those of us who are in the healthcare profession.
Yeah, exactly. It's a mentally demanding profession. And everyone assumes that the doctors, nurses, and so on, they're all fine. But they've got a lot that they see that maybe they don't want to see, things they have to deal with, they may not want to deal with. It takes a toll on people over time. And so, yeah, Jeff's trying to do something about it. And he's done phenomenally with this. At some personal cost to him, because every year when he talks about this, he's got to relive his own experiences again. But he rarely says no to a speaking event. I spoke to him earlier today. He's just come back from one, and it's always positively received because it's an issue that needs to be managed better. And I don't think anyone's done as much for this cause as Jeff has. And last year he won the Australian Mental Health Prize, which is a big prize given in Australia for those that are helping, people with mental health issues. And so he won that last year, which was fantastic to see. Great recognition. Yeah.
So thanks for being a guest on our podcast. It was fantastic meeting you, and I look forward to hearing your input in the coming months.
This has been a presentation from the College of Remote and Offshore Medicine. If you would like to earn CPD credits for this podcast, you can join the Council of Members. Being a member of the college gives you free CPD credit, free access to our virtual field guide, and discounts on our e-learning courses. You can join the team on our college website at quorum.edu.mt.